I retried the first one, and now it looks like it's working. So,
Yeah,
what's up?
I'm I'm new to it all, so I couldn't say. But hey, there you are. So good
There
deal.
I am. How are you?
I'm good. How are yourself?
Cannot complain.
Good deal. All right, for a little intro, this is Brian. We've talked before online in a group chat, and the topic of miracles came up. And Brian asked if I'd like to discuss miracles a little more. So here we are. So why don't you go ahead? You're my guest. So why don't you start off? What do you have to say about miracles?
Yeah, I guess I guess my approach to miracles is I'm a little more open to them as a possibility. I find a couple of arguments for God's existence pretty compelling, like the fine tuning argument and the contingency argument, which we've talked about. But like I've told you, I'm not a strict theist in the sense that like I believe in an interventionist type God. Some days I think that's more likely than its negation. Some days I tend to think, if there is a God, he's very absent. He or she is very hands off. Um, but I've seen some miracle claims that appear to be, um, at the very least, harder to dismiss than other miracle claims. But I haven't done the amount of research that I think is necessary to really um, say with a lot of confidence that any particular miracle claim is extremely well substantiated. I just think there are some that are interesting and certainly worth investigation. So that's kind of my position.
Okay, one of my questions then would be what would you differentiate between what somebody would call miraculous and what would be a divine intervention type miracle? Because I could agree that there's miraculous things. Um, people get shot multiple times um, and they survive. Somebody else gets similar wounds and they don't. So it can be miraculous, but was it divine or was it just luck? And what would you say would be where you would draw the line of where it was just lucky and where you would see that it was actually a divine intervention?
Well, so I think there's a number of things going on, or there's a number of factors that I think can lend credibility to a purported claim of divine intervention. Tim McGrew, I think, has a helpful set of criteria. I don't think I have it memorized, but let's see if I can rattle off some of the criteria. And it's like it's more plausible to believe if the claim is made close to where it was purported to have happened, because it's easier to make up a miracle claim if you're hundreds of miles away and you don't have easy access to supposed witnesses. So you want to be close in geographic distance, but you also want to be close in time. So something that supposedly happened yesterday is much easier to investigate than something that happened 100 years ago.
Sure.
And you want to have credible witnesses. It should be a rare event, and not just rare, but it should be rare and have uh, a religious context to it. So, I know there's such a thing as spontaneous remission, for example, in cancer, but um, that might not be the best example because I wasn't going to mention like, oh, so and so got healed from cancer, and I think that's a good miracle example. But the reason I bring that up is because I think like even cases where there are natural healings, I guess, like paralysis. I think if someone is healed from paralysis in the context of just having been prayed for, um, I find that interesting and harder to dismiss than, I guess, a run of the mill miracle claim. And I think I mentioned to you like the Barbara Snyder, forget her full name, but she had multiple sclerosis and, was bedridden for 15 years, blind. And then I think the story, anyway, is that she got prayed for by a bunch of radio listeners. Like the radio host asked people in the local area to pray for her, and she was healed instantly, and she regained her sight, her mobility, and even like the muscle atrophy on her calves had, like she had calf muscles again. And usually, like even with other miracle claims, that's not the case. Like there's still a muscle memory kind of thing that has to be regained, and you have to regain your strength. So that's one example. I didn't come prepared with 10 to dish out, but I think those are some of the reasons that one should find a miracle claim at least more plausible than just saying I saw, I don't know, any kind of supernatural phenomenon. So.
Mhm. Well, I guess the obvious question is why that person and not another person?
So I don't think I need to know why something happened to Jeff and not Bill in order to believe that it happened to Jeff.
Sure.
I mean,
Well, for
it's
the
a,
sake of argument, let's grant that Bill was healed and Jeff wasn't, and you're Jeff.
yeah. If I'm Jeff and I've been praying to be healed, and I feel like I've been trying to live out my faith as best as I can, and I guess Bill is doing the same. Hopefully, it would sting even worse if Bill was like appeared to be have a worse moral character than I did, and he gets healed. I can fully accept that would upset me, and I would question why that happened. But I still think like the appropriate approach is to try and separate myself as much from like the personal impact that it has on me as much as possible. Because I think that's how you should critically evaluate, I guess, any claim. But yeah, I would hope that would be my approach, at least. Easier said than done. If I were in Jeff's shoes or whoever it was that didn't get healed, I think you said it was Jeff.
Right.
Yeah, I would probably question God, probably doubt God, and be frustrated. But I think that's a separate issue from whether or not I should think that God actually did act on Bill.
So you would question the reason more than the existence of God.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of saying it. I mean, yeah, like I find certain things like fine tuning good evidence for God, but I don't find the question, why did God fine tune the universe, to be reason to doubt. I think a better question would be like, would that argument specifically would be something like, can this be explained naturally?
Mhm.
And I know there are, purported solutions to it, and I know we've kind of touched on those a little bit before. But at least at this point, I'm not particularly convinced by them. But I also haven't explored as much as I think I should. So,
Well, let's say that 25% can't be explained. So let's say 75% have an explanation. The medicine worked, right? The surgery worked. Everything went exactly as it was supposed to. So let's suppose that 25% And then the question comes up again, then is it, did they believe more? Did they get prayed? Did more people pray for them? Or does it matter, when the people are praying, whether it's going to have any intervention divinely or not? You see where I'm going? Whereas, do the healings happen if you don't ask for them?
Do the healings happen if you don't ask for them?
I mean, do you have to have a prayer session? Do you have to have, the radio station pray all,
Oh,
having
I see what you're
everybody
saying.
praying? Or can
Yeah,
it,
I mean,
do you have to ask for the intervention? I'm just asking what your opinion is?
yeah. I mean, I guess I haven't given that a ton of thought, like my exact theology, if you want to call it that, on um, what
What about your
God would.
examples? Are the examples always that people were prayed for? Or do you have examples where,
Oh, okay.
they're not religious, they weren't
I
prayed
see what you're saying.
for, they just, you know,
Yeah. So, are you asking, like, would I consider it to be divine intervention, even if the person weren't prayed for, or like,
yeah, they
or
weren't
is there a context? Or
right,
okay.
right.
Um, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I guess I haven't heard too many examples where that's the case. I mean, I've talked about like spontaneous remission, but
And we'll given, those are all given in the, 75 hypothetical percent, we'll say, all those. And I'm giving you 25% that no explanation. You know what I mean? No remission. I'll grant all that. Okay.
yeah, I mean, I think it's going to depend on the specific claim. If it's something of like quality to the one I mentioned, or um, I mean, yeah, it would depend on the specific example, like a limb regrowing, or blindness or deafness being healed instantaneously. Um, I don't know. I guess I just wouldn't know what to make of that. It would seem odd to call it divine intervention, because I guess so. I guess you're kind of teasing out what I actually believe, but haven't articulated before. So I appreciate that. Um, I guess, yeah, I guess I consider divine intervention in a way to kind of require prayer or some kind of uh, religious context. But maybe I'm wrong in that. I'll have to give that some more thought. Um, does that answer your question at all? Or
Sure. That's what I was asking. That, okay. So that basically, yeah, you believe that, the prayer has to happen, that or let's just, the person has to believe, maybe. Would that have,
so
bearing on it if they're a believer or not? Because, um, especially if you're going to go with a Christian, view on things, if you believe you are healed, type verses in the Bible.
right.
Do you think it makes a difference if you're a believer or not?
I would assume it does, but yeah, I mean, that's just kind of, I guess that's a fairly warranted assumption, like under the assumption that the Christian God existed, uh, you know, and I know there are miracle claims in other religions, but it seems like Christian miracles happen fairly often. So, yeah, I guess under the assumption that the Christian God existed, I would say it adds weight to the claim if the person's a believer, I guess. Um, but I don't know. I mean, I guess it depends on the proportionality. Like, I think we would need to evaluate all of the miracle claims, and I think there'd be a lot of people that claim to be genuine believers that maybe weren't. So yeah, I guess I just don't know if we're in any kind of position to have access to that information. But I would think, like, if the Christian God existed, this is what I meant to say, is that he would want people to believe in him, and so there would be some kind of um not reward or benefit, but I guess by virtue of having a relationship with God, maybe maybe the likelihood of a miracle happening increases. That's a suspicion anyway. I would think like if you're going out of your way to reject God, that God would. I mean, it's possible, I guess, that he could perform a miracle, but it seems far less likely that he would want to act on someone like that than someone who's been faithfully serving him. But at the same time, to your point, there's plenty of people that seem to be faithfully serving him, and their prayers for miracles aren't answered. So,
Right.
But that's just kind of my initial
Okay.
thoughts
When
on it. Yeah.
you're and then mentioning other religions, what happens when there's a miracle in another religion, in another culture, never heard of Jesus or Christianity? Is it still the same God, or could it possibly be another God? Could there be more than one God?
Yeah. I mean, so I'm not a Christian. So I guess you know, I find Christianity more plausible than, for instance, Islam. But I think, like, if I heard a credible miracle claim happened in like a Muslim context, I would say, okay, that's interesting. What do I make of that? Does that mean the Muslim God exists? That's a possibility. Um, but then when you study Islam a little bit, and I haven't done that to any great extent, but it seems like there are a lot of flaws with Islam that I think for me would override the miracle claim unless it was uh, of a great nature, like the ones I mentioned earlier, and maybe there are some that I just haven't heard about, but um, I would tend to think like I have a lot of additional reasons for rejecting Islam that would probably make me find the miracle claim less credible, at least initially. Maybe enough evidence could be presented to convince me otherwise, but um,
So you would back up more on what you would think would be a more sound theology or religion to begin with, and that would give more credence to the claim.
yeah, I think so. I mean, I think I think Christianity is more probable than Zoroastrianism, for example. So if there were a miracle claim within a Zoroastrian context, which I have no idea what that looks like or what their prayer looks like or anything like that, but
Sure.
or praying to Hercules or Zeus, um, I would find that harder to accept, like just on the surface. I mean, if miracle claims like that were happening all the time, like I prayed to Zeus and XYZ happened, a healing happened, I'd be like, okay, maybe there's something to this. But I think it would take more than one example, and it would have to be of a pretty extreme nature. But I also think the miracle claims I'm evaluating in a Christian context have to be of a pretty extreme nature for me to consider them as potential divine interventions. So hopefully, I'm not being too unfair to the other world religions, but I definitely think Christianity is more likely than certain other religions. That doesn't mean I think it's like 85, 90% probable that it's true, but um, I think there's better evidence for Jesus' resurrection, for example, than, I guess Zeus being a literal being in the sky or something like that.
But you would accept that if you're Hindu, whatever the religion would be, that if you were one of these miraculous survivors of something, you would give credit to your God, right?
Um, Likely, I would think. I mean, if I had like a really bad injury in India and several Hindus came and prayed for me and I was healed instantly, I would find it very hard to be like, thanks Yahweh, like they got it wrong, but like, uh,
Maybe Yahweh was busy.
yeah, or I know the true source. They just misunderstand your identity, but
Mhm.
um, I don't know. I mean, since I'm not a Christian, like I guess I'm open to more possibilities about why God could perform miracles in other contexts or other religions. Um, and I don't know. I guess one reason could be that he or she wants to help people in different contexts despite their religion. But yeah, I haven't given that a ton of thought. So I know I've said that a lot already. I just want to emphasize that a little bit. But yeah, I think if it were me, I would probably be inclined to think like the particular God prayed to was involved. So
Now, what about people that use homeopathic remedies? Are they? I mean, we know they don't work. I mean, the generally the medications in them are non-existent or so small that medically they shouldn't do anything.
right.
But the person is cured, and they give all the credit to the homeopathic remedy. Do
Yeah,
you
I mean, I'd
do
be
you
interested
think
to
it
hear.
matters to them, or does it still? Would you still say that they owe God some credit?
Um, I guess it depends on the specific case. Like, I guess I would want you to bring up a case where someone is like deathly ill and um, attributes the healing to homeopathic medicine.
I guess where I'm going is mind over matter. Do you think that that the person can heal themselves if they believe in the homeopathic, if they believe in God, if they believe in and any other power, crystals,
Law of
whatever it
attraction.
might be?
Yeah.
Do you think that maybe it is a natural thing that's being somehow enhanced in us because we believe, and it doesn't matter what you believe? You think that's possible?
Yeah, I think it's possible. And I think the placebo effect is very real. And, you know,
Hmm.
um, simply believing that things are going to get better can impact, your healing. I'm not saying like I wouldn't go so far as the typical law of attraction um, claims, which are um, if you believe something and believe that it's already yours, you're actually like manifesting it and you're attracting it into your life. I don't actually go that far, but yeah, I mean, there's a reason there are placebo trials and clinical trials, right?
Hmm.
Or placebo groups. So yeah, I think what somebody believes can influence their behavior. It can influence how they react to certain things. And based on just the placebo alone, I would say if your belief in God results in you thinking that I'm going to be healed from this, I would say that can play a role in your healing. Although, I'm not going to say that alone is sufficient or anything like that. But um, and when I say that alone is sufficient, I'm not saying like they're not giving God credit. I'm talking about like I still think medicine is very necessary, even though um, people can kind of heal themselves to a degree with that kind of thing. So, but I'm not sure how relevant that is to whether or not um, divine intervention took place with Barbara Snyder or with some other examples that are given in Craig Keener's book. Next, if we ever talk again, I'll have to bring some specifics. But um, yeah, that was a long-winded way of saying, sure, people can believe something and benefit from it, even if the belief isn't directed at a true proposition. So,
Hmm. What I was leaning towards is that maybe it's not divine, that we can have a completely natural answer for it. That there's a, if you trigger something in the psyche just right, that it can be proven that it does help you be healed or be cured or at least maybe feel better.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think you could say that of a lot of cases. Like I think a lot of people say, "Oh, it was a miracle," and um, maybe God was involved, but it certainly seems like it's perfectly explainable um, under naturalism or under theism, but God's not, intervening. So yeah, I think it just depends on the specific example. I think ones where it seems all but medically impossible for a healing to take place. Like I think placebo can only get you so far. It can't. If you're paralyzed, I don't think placebo could, in an instant, regenerate mobility of limbs. Have you regain your eyesight? Have you regain, muscle that had atrophied? Um, and that's very well documented. That was documented by medical professionals as well. It wasn't just her family claiming that happened or anything. And this was in the mid '80s, I want to say. So in a time where there were pictures and um, plenty of people knew her, and I guess that's partially how she got people to pray for her. But yeah, I guess it just depends on the specific example.
Well, I'm not going to argue that there are strange things that happen. I'm not going to deny it. The question is, why? And that's why I kind of lean, well, if you believe it was crystals, then crystals healed her. You know what I mean? So what, you would have to then go to the next question is, what's the next level of, uh, is it crystals or does it have to be a god doing it? Or can it be, is there, you know, like you were saying, you have to ask for it. So is there, does it have to be somebody you can ask, a divine being, and not just asking the power of crystals or something else?
Um, so I want to either clarify or modify what I said about having to ask for it. I don't think you
Okay.
have to ask for it in order for it to be potentially miraculous, but I do think that adds weight.
Mhm.
Uh, Something exceedingly rare and, all the other criteria I mentioned earlier, if all that fits the particular miracle claim and they asked, I think that adds weight to it. But, if someone narrowly escaped death or something, um, I'm trying to think of like an exact scenario, but if the odds were wildly against them, like one of the fine tuning examples, like 1 in 10 to the 120th, you could maybe say, this was a miracle, even if they hadn't stopped and said, God, please, let me survive. But so I wanted to say that, and then as far as the crystals thing goes, you know, I think the problem with appealing to crystals versus God is that at least from my perspective, it seems like the crystals are kind of arbitrary and like they're impersonal. There doesn't seem to be like there doesn't seem to be any clear causal relationship between crystals and their purported effects, at least none that I'm aware of. Where and atheists often say like, uh, what mechanism does God use to act, or you know what did God cause, or what did God affect if there was nothing there? And I think those are good questions. And I'm not saying because I don't know what the mechanism is that um, would link crystals to a given event if we knew it there, that it's not causing that. But it just seems, it seems very arbitrary, and I'm trying to distinguish, I guess, the God belief and the crystals. Um, yeah, I guess God has more explanatory power, because with God you have a personal being, and we know agents can cause things. Um,
So if the person is doing the rituals with the crystals,
mhm.
asking for healing, do you think that it's just God is actually listening then?
um, I would lean towards no. I mean, well, maybe.
Because they aren't following the religious rituals of that you mentioned earlier.
So when you say listening, do you mean like with the intention of acting, or?
Well, let's just say that it's the Christian God, but you're praying to not the Christian God, or you're praying to a tree, or it doesn't really matter. Do you think that it would still be, the one God is still listening, no matter, even if you're not asking to it by name or by the correct religion?
I mean, so I
Would
guess.
you would the Christian God hold it against the Hindu person who's asking for healing in serious prayer being broadcast
Right.
across the radio station, and everything that you used for the Christian lady?
Yeah, so I would say if Christianity were true, then the Christian God would exist, and the other gods, I suppose, wouldn't exist. And so the Christian God would hear the Hindu's prayer, um, because Christianity says God is all knowing. But I think a more interesting question is, would I respond? It kind of sounds like you're asking, like, would I respond the same way to um, a miracle claim in another religion, or
Would No, I'm asking, would God respond the same way?
oh, okay. I mean,
Do you have to be a believer, or can you just be,
yeah, I think as a non-Christian, I'm kind
or
of
can Yahweh or whatever be sympathetic to the Hindu child or person
sure.
and hear the radio broadcast going off and everything else?
Yeah, I mean, that as a non-Christian, I guess I'm kind of agnostic on whether or not God would have motive to perform miracles in some religions, but not others. I mean, except for maybe like obvious examples, like where you know all the religious adherents are extremely evil or something. But um, yeah, I think if I were a Christian, I would lean towards saying God would probably be less inclined to perform miracles than other religions. But I would certainly rather have a God that appreciates sincerity um, and faith, really, to the divine, even if they don't have the identity exactly right. And you could say that's true of a lot of Christians, right? I mean, all these talks about false gospels. You know,
Mhm.
they're worshiping a Jesus, but is it really Jesus? Like, is it true to the actual character of who Jesus really was? Um, so yeah, I mean, I guess I don't know. I wouldn't say God definitely does this or does that, but I would say I would prefer, certainly, and it seems more holy or good of God to appreciate sincerity and faith, or I don't know if I want to say faith, but yeah, sincere prayer and sincere um, seeking, God's help, than a God who would say, I'm going to turn you away because you were born in, Saudi Arabia and you don't worship Jesus. But
Right.
yeah.
Okay. Then let's go a little bit then to as far as what would be a example of any healings that happen by these so-called healers. Do you think one person, has more of a power from God to, lay hands on these people, or, whatever they do to heal them? Or do you think they're just, you know, not real? I'll be kind and I won't make any accusations, but are they acting in good faith? Do they actually have more healing power, or would you say that anybody that prays, there's nothing extra by some of these guys that lay hands on people and stuff?
I tried to swivel to hide the fact that my bed's not made because I'm doing laundry and I got the.
Yeah, I know. Hey, that's why I've got the black in the background, because
um,
it's not a problem.
so I would say, I mean,
Do you believe in healers? Would that be easier?
yeah, I mean, so
Over
like,
over and above anybody else. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah, no, I
do
understand what
do
you're
you
asking.
have to go to, Benny Hinn to get healed, or
Right, right.
can I go to Brian and be healed? You know what I mean?
Um, so I think I'll have to answer it kind of two ways. Like,
Okay.
I would say, at least from my perspective, it seems like if Christianity were true, that there would be people with spiritual gifts, and I think one of those could be healing. And so it's possible that God could heal through any person, but perhaps some people have, God has, chosen especially to be active in performing healings. Um, from my perspective, like what I currently believe about God, I would just say, maybe, yeah, I guess I would just say, as I would with miracle claims in general, like if they were happening a bunch, and if they were happening a bunch with one particular person, I would say, okay, that's interesting. Maybe this person does have something special going on. But I
Mhm.
don't think I would start off with, um, if I heard of a purported healing, I don't think I would reject it on the grounds that, oh, it didn't come from a televangelist.
Mhm.
At least that's kind of my current view. And the
So the
miracle claims that I mentioned, I don't think any of them were, the result of attending a big rally or anything like that.
Right. Oh, just fair enough. I'm just trying to pick apart,
No, sure.
different aspects of the miracle claims. And um, what was the other one I wanted to ask you? Again, looking for a natural explanation. So you would agree that maybe there's just a natural explanation?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the claim. Like, I think the more extreme the case, the less I'm going to be inclined to think there's just some unknown natural possibility.
Okay.
You know, I think Lance in our group
You're
mentioned uh, someone getting decapitated and someone prays for them to regrow their head. I'm
mhm,
pretty I'm pretty sure I would be like 100% sure that that was uh, divine intervention, um, or 99.99%.
sure.
So yeah, I guess it just depends on the case. The more the more rare and exceptional, I guess, that the case is, yeah, I tend to find that more miraculous, at least on the surface. So
I think, yeah, that he was pointing out that with all the miracle claims, things like limbs do never seem to grow back.
there was
And
a
that would indeed be miraculous. And those, just don't seem to happen.
well, it's funny you say that because I just read an article from a Facebook friend of mine, and I'm not saying I'm 100% convinced of this or anything, but I did find it pretty interesting. And he was making the case that a man did regrow a limb, um, I guess in the 17th century, so not ideal,
Mm.
but there were skeptics that apparently attested to this in writing. Doctors apparently they buried the limb after it had been amputated, and when he regrew a limb, I think they dug up, at least according to this account, they dug it up and it was no longer there. And I want to say the number he gave was like there's over 30 eyewitnesses or 30 attestations or something. And I want to say even David Hume said it was like not a bona fide miracle, but he thought it was like one of the better miracle claims out there. So I'll have to find that article and send it to you. You might find it interesting, but
Sure.
Yeah, I guess I'm unsure if they never happen. So
And then the next one would be, what is your opinion on the dumb luck issue? Let's say, you and I are in battle and we both get shot the same amount of times in the same areas of our body, and one of us survives and the other one doesn't. Is that any kind of divine intervention, or would that just fall into a dumb luck category?
yeah, I think I'm probably always going to lean more towards dumb luck, as you put it, or
Whatever, yeah, whatever you want to call it, beating
yeah,
the
like
odds or whatever.
the natural outworking of events. In really in any context where it seems like that's a possibility, even a remote one, I would still lean towards that. So yeah, I mean, I guess like if it had been, I'm shot at 15 times and like, I don't know, I'm shot in the head. 7 of those times, and all of them should have been lethal. And right before I get shot at, I pray and you pray that I'm not going to die. Maybe I'd be a little more inclined to think like, okay, maybe God was at work there, but I still don't think I would be dead set on that. Well, if I'm getting shot in the head, maybe I would be, but you kind of see where I'm getting at. Like, I think if it's just a rare event, but it could happen naturally, I don't think that's sufficient enough for me. And Christians and other theists all the time, I think, attribute things to God that maybe God cared about, like you finding your car keys or what have you, but that could have just happened on its own. And I guess that kind of brings up an interesting question too. Like, would God happily take the credit even if he wasn't all that involved? Like, does he appreciate it when you give him thanks or gratitude if he exists? Even if he's not like manipulating the dice, so to speak.
Well,
So,
I think the Christian God tends to lead towards wanting the praise for it, but
yeah.
I always bring, if you're God, why do you need to be thanked for anything? It would seem to be irrelevant because you're God. But
I think how I'd respond to that is like I think I used to have more of a problem with the idea of God wanting worship and praise um,
I
than I
mean,
do.
how do you tell God that it's awesome? You know what I mean? You hey God, you're super duper, I mean, you're God. I mean, you're kind of, it's kind of a given that they're awesome. And, I just never understood how you could give praise to God to begin with.
Yeah, so I don't think it's about God wanting or like getting getting joy out of his creatures praising him, or I guess he does get joy out of it, but it's not like at least I don't perceive it to be like a vanity thing, um, and I think that could be justified by the fact that if God exists, God would be kind of the highest possible being, um, the greatest good, and so for God to refer you to something else to praise, because I think we all kind of end up praising something to some degree. I mean, we might not call it worship or praise, but um, we all focus on things, um, sometimes to the detriment, or to the point where we end up sacrificing things that should be more important, or at least equally as important. Um, and so, yeah, I would say, if God exists and God is the greatest good, God is the greatest possible being, for him to want us to worship him or to praise him, I think would make sense, because the alternative would be him referring you to something lesser, or yeah, I think that's kind of how I would think about it, but I don't know.
Now, what about personal experience? You were telling some stories. Do you have any personal experience where it lends your belief? I mean, have you ever been cured of anything that you just couldn't have an answer for, or close family member or something like that?
I don't think so. Maybe I'm forgetting, but I would think if it were even remotely extreme, I would remember it. Yeah, I don't think anyone in my family or anyone I know has been healed miraculously. I've had friends that have told me, um, I prophesied or whatever, and I went and spoke to this guy, and he said he was going through exactly what I thought he was going through based on what God told me. And I take those stories with a grain of salt, I guess, but I do think that people are being sincere, um, and they don't strike me as all around dishonest people. As far as personal experiences with, like, oh wow, that felt like it was from God. I mean, nothing beyond your standard, I guess, goosebumps type deal where, you know, when I was a little kid and I was saved, um, I felt something. It could have been the bass in the room and the context. To your point earlier about the belief itself generating feelings, that could have very well been what happened. And yeah, I don't know what it was. I mean, I guess if I'm not a Christian right now, I don't think it was Jesus. But yeah, I guess I'm open to religious experiences if God exists, but I don't think they should ever be the reason a person believes, which is kind of hard to reconcile. Like, if I'm entertaining Christianity being true, because it seems like if Christianity is true, then God or Jesus has set up a system in which that means of coming to belief is like very common. And I don't know, I take issue with that, because I mean, as well as I do that, like, it's not unique to Christians. There's Mormons that have religious experiences, there's Muslims, and they're all of a similar nature. Um, and it's brought about through prayer and being in that context. And yeah, I think if I were to just take the Christian one seriously, that would be incredibly biased. So I was having a discussion with a couple of friends of mine recently about that, and one of my friends is an atheist and the other's a Christian, and Um, but the atheist and I are both in agreement that like religious experiences, I really don't see how they can be trusted, unless it's like an extreme example, like a healing or something. But if it's just a feeling, like if you're like, I believe in Jesus because I felt him, you know, I would say I don't think that's enough. What about the Mormon that feels the presence of the Holy Ghost, and to them it confirms the truth of Mormonism? Uh,
Mhm.
why should we discount their experience? Sorry, I'm beating a dead horse probably, but
No, I was going to agree that I don't discount people's experiences. You know, people have genuine experiences. People have very powerful emotional experiences, and
right,
it's not just from religion. People get powerful experiences climbing a mountain and reaching the summit. So I'm not going to discount anybody's experiences,
sure,
but I would have to agree with you that in a religious context, it does seem that these miracles happen a lot more, and that maybe they're attributing, everyday things like a headache going away to a divine intervention. So my problem is dwindling it down to, like you say, ones that are very, very difficult to explain, like somebody with, that should have had atrophied muscles or something like that. Because
right,
when you go down the list, like you said, most of them, and I was doing a little reading around, and yeah, a large portion of them are things that can come and go, like arthritis, migraines, cancer, and so that generally the numbers are a lot larger because they're just attributing everyday things to miracles.
sure,
So, I'm more looking at it more like, okay, what are these ones, like you say, that are just really, really hard to understand?
hmm,
And then I have to say, okay, it is a miracle. What then I have to ask, well, what does that do? I mean, I don't see, I mean, you've had miracles happening, and it's not like everybody's became a Christian. You know what
sure,
I mean? So I mean, are people just not getting the message, or do you say maybe, maybe God's not giving a clear enough sign by not healing enough people? You know what I mean? It seems like I'm trying to figure out what, I know God is mysterious and maybe he has an ulterior motive,
hmm,
for letting all these people, be ill, but yet, still curing some of them. But, trying to sort it out as to, I could understand that, all these people are being healed
hmm,
to give a sign.
right,
But, let's say even, a few years ago, we probably wouldn't have heard any of these stories. You know what I mean?
sure,
Without, international news and internet and everything and stuff.
hmm,
So I don't really see, where the very few that happen in very few places that very few know about would be effective as, any kind of sign or anything like that. So would you say that it doesn't have anything to do with that, and it's just part of the works in the mysterious ways category?
yeah. I don't think I have to have an either or there. I would say the miracle certainly could lend credence or credibility to the claim that both God exists and God is active in the world. But I could also say that God could have reasons for allowing unbelief, and God could have reasons for not making his existence so obvious that it's like as undeniable as the sun in the sky or something like that. Um, one reason is like I think if it were that obvious, it could potentially result in improper relationships. People would that would kind of remove the possibility of free will in a way. I mean, you could reject God, but it seems like there'd be a greater propensity to fear God in a way that like wouldn't exist were he invisible and kind of has the nature he has now, at least the one I think he has now. Um, so I don't have a ton of like potential explanations for why God wouldn't be more obvious. I mean, this is the whole problem of divine hiddenness, right? Like
Well,
if
yeah,
it's,
no, yeah. Obviously, nobody does. It's been argued to death, but
well,
just
I think there are examples that I'm just, I don't have memorized. Um, a good resource on this, I know Blake Junta has talked about this on his website, beliefmap.org. And I really like that website because it's kind of like a flow chart of theist versus atheist arguments. And so, you would click on an atheist objection like, no, if God existed, his existence would be more obvious. And then the Christian point of view will come in like, well, hang on, maybe it's XYZ.
mhm.
Um, so I guess I'm more open to there being an explanation for why God would allow unbelief and God wouldn't have his existence be so obvious. And I don't think my not knowing why he would do those things um, causes problems for me when evaluating a miracle claim. Like I don't look at those and say like, oh, theism is already starting from like such a low point that like to overcome the evidence against theism with a miracle claim is like a really big ask. Um, so I guess I have a different starting point.
Sure, sure. I guess you could flip it and say the opposite thing too. That the Christian view is always God created us because He wants to have a relationship with us, and He wants to spend eternity with us, and He wants us to believe, and He
Hmm.
wants us to be devout, and all these things. And that maybe if He, gave a little better sign, maybe that would work out a little better. So easily, yeah, you could flip it both ways.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair question and fair point to make.
I
You
mean, a
know,
believer already believes. I mean, if you believe, you believe.
right, right.
So I don't think that it's convincing the believer who got healed to believe. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah. So you're
I'm
asking
looking
like
at, yeah,
the point of the
what's
miracle.
convincing, people like me or people of other religions. You know what I mean? That's kind of it doesn't seem to be, it
I
it
mean,
it
maybe
reinforces one's belief, but
I
it's not
wouldn't
more
say.
like it's expanding the belief or the religion or anything. I don't see how that, I
Well,
mean,
that I mean,
Islam's growing in leaps and bounds. So I mean, you could argue that, you know, maybe they got the right,
but isn't that
miracle
mostly
guy.
due to like birth rates? That's not necessarily due to
Well,
like
but
evangelism.
God does that, right?
Maybe.
He knits them all in the womb. And
According to Islam, I don't. I mean,
well, I mean, if you're going to go with God, God does everything. So, I mean, if God wanted more babies in one area than another, then it's a miracle, right?
yeah, someone can make that argument. I wouldn't find it particularly convincing. What I wanted to say about the miracle claims is I don't think we're limited to. Um, you ask like, what would it do for me? What would it do for people of other religions? Um, it could be one of many reasons that someone eventually came to believe. And I'm kind of shooting from the hip here, but you know, in my experience, I've found cumulative cases for theism to be better than I believe in God because of one argument. Um, and so I think if a miracle within a Christian context, like was witnessed by a Muslim, for example, and they didn't come to believe immediately, um, but that became part of what eventually did lead them to belief. I would still say that that was a useful thing for God to have done. Um, And even to your point about like deepening the faith of those who already believe, um, I wouldn't see that as completely pointless of God. If he existed and wanted people to believe in him, I certainly see people deepening their faith in him or trust in him, however you want to phrase it. That would be a good thing. Um, so I think those are possible reasons the miracle could have been performed.
My view is on that instead of the idea of getting more believers, I think that it's creating more skeptics. I think that's the problem, because when you start looking and you look how many of the claims can be debunked, and even if you have, the few, there's always a few that you can't explain in anything. So I don't, again, I don't see where it's doing anything for anybody else or for the world. Or I understand that it could have a theological argument that it's all part of God's plan and everything. But in the grand scheme of things, as somebody from the outside, I just don't see, that it's evidence of a God. I think it's just evidence of some things we can't explain, because I just don't see, if it's just a few being cured. And again, I don't see where people across faiths are going, wow, that Christian was cured, or wow, that Muslim was cured. And they're all, jumping, the other side or anything. It just seems like, I don't know. To me,
Well,
it seems pretty pointless, as I guess, you know what I mean? I
so
just, I can't see any point at all in a God doing a handful of miraculous healings. I just,
yeah, I guess
you
I wouldn't
know,
say it's just a handful. I
well,
mean,
again, let's say, I'll give you 25%. You know what I mean? I'll be generous. I'll go way beyond just a few percent. I can give you, I'll give you a whole, large percentage. And it still seems that something to convince people, or to, actually be loving and sympathetic, would be to, wipe out cancer or wipe out childhood leukemia, or, and I often said I can understand people aging, things going wrong, but I always have the problem with the children and kids that are born with things. And for me, miraculous would be those things taken care of. And for, somebody, bless their heart, that's 80 years old, that got their sight back, that's great. But I just, as far as it being a divine miracle, I guess I'll always struggle with, trying to see any point to it. You know what I mean?
yeah, I mean, I certainly have more, I guess, of a soft heart for the child than. Not that I'm like against the elderly, but
Oh no, I want everybody to be, yeah, everybody
yeah,
should,
but
yeah.
no, I understand what you're saying. Like, um, if I had to, you know,
Well,
had to
you were
choose
talking
between
about
something.
how, like you have a scale where you would go through, you know what I mean? And I
Yeah,
guess my scale always goes back to, if it's divine, why the kids? You know what I mean? That one always seems to be one of the tough. Even when you ask Bill Craig and some of the other ones, they always get stumped on the kids, because it always seems, that there doesn't seem to be anything divine at all when it comes to the kids.
yeah. I mean, it is tough, and I'm not going to try and spout off an answer for why God allows that. I guess
But
all I
that,
can say is that for me, it hasn't been, I guess, as much of a hindrance. Like I've, I do think children suffering and people suffering in general is a horrible travesty, and um, I wish we could eliminate childhood diseases and child death. Um, but there could be a reason that I don't know about, and maybe God could tell me, and it still wouldn't comfort me.
Mhm.
Um, that's not a satisfying answer. Like, it's not satisfying to me either.
Oh, and I don't think we're going to have a philosophical revelation that's going to change the world or anything.
Sure.
We're just talking. Yeah, but for me though, it just seems like the for to be something divine would have to be something like a children's wards, just kids hopping out of bed and they're all cured, or limbs growing, things like that. When it's anything else, I'm always going to say, well, there's just a natural explanation. We just don't understand. And that's for me being on the skeptical side. But I'm just I can't discount though that some things we can't explain. So there could be, and that's why I was hinting around that maybe there are other ways to explain them, and maybe there's just something we haven't discovered yet, that maybe if you get enough people in a room together and they pray, that maybe there's a something to it, maybe that it triggers something or something that we just don't understand. But divine to me always seems like magic, that poof, this person was cured out of magic, and that there can't be any other explanation. And I think there's always a lot of other explanations. And my basis was, when I was looking up miracles, when you see the religious sides of the arguments, there's a lot more lenience to the miracles. And when you read the medical papers and you listen to what the doctors have to say, it's totally the opposite. However, they will also admit some things they just can't explain. So, is a miracle just a placeholder, or is there
Yeah.
some way where we could really, I mean, I know it's tough, but do you think there's ever any way that we could differentiate between what's just a natural thing and what was divine, or is it always going to be a faith thing?
Yeah, well, so hopefully I'm going a little bit beyond a God of the gaps. I'm not arguing simply because we don't know what explains this event, whatever it might be. Let's say Barbara Oakley's healing, that therefore it's a miracle. Again, I think you have to look at a multitude of factors. You have to look at the trustworthiness of the witnesses, how early the claim is made in relationship to when the purported miracle took place. Um, can it be investigated? Can other people that didn't know Barbara go see her, and um, or people that weren't there at the time of the event but knew her, while she was paralyzed, can they go visit her and see that she's been healed? Um, yeah, I think there's a lot that has to go on before I would be inclined to call it a miracle. And even cases like that where I lean towards, I guess, a miracle, or at least I'm pretty open to it. I still think that if like that was my explanation, um, that I wouldn't be certain of that. I could just say I think this is the most plausible given the set of options before us. Um, and I'm like, with fine tuning, I'm open to the possibility of a natural explanation. It just doesn't seem like that's going to happen. And I think the example I gave in our group was, because that's often brought up as an objection. I don't think you brought it up, but it's like, well, science changes, and sure it does, but we're pretty sure that certain things like the science behind tectonic plates, we're not going to have this crazy radical change tomorrow. Like,
Hmm.
there's certain things we're pretty confident in, and I think we can say that about fine tuning. And similarly, I think our medical technology and understanding of medicine and the way the body heals itself might not be as advanced as it will be in 100 years. But I think we have enough that I could be confident that like a person who's blind, paralyzed, etc., isn't just going to spontaneously heal, lose their muscle atrophy, etc. Um, at least that's my current position. So, um,
But you believe in God, but you're not sure on Christianity, though, right?
that's
Is
right, and
that
I'm not
is
even
that
sure about theism. Really, I mean, so I called myself a deist, and then I got corrected and was told I'm a philosophical theist. When I was like, that sounds cooler and more sophisticated, so I'll wear that label.
right?
And I guess the difference is like a deist says, I believe in God, and I either know or I sincerely believe that God did not have any subsequent intervention after creating the universe. Me, it's more of an openness to maybe he or she, I keep saying she, guess I've been listening to Ariana Grande. You know, maybe God is or is not involved. Certain things like the miracle claims I've mentioned tend, like when I spend a lot of time thinking about those, I tend to think, okay, it seems quite plausible that God is, actually interacting in the world actively. But then I see things like animal suffering, and I, learn about this, the theory of evolution and how much of a bloodbath it was for millions and millions of years before humans arrived, and uh, that to me sounds like if there is a God, that God is just kind of um, absent and or has a psychology that we can't even really understand. So it might not even be fruitful to talk about him. Um,
That's where I would fall in. That if a God exists, I just don't see the intervention.
yeah, I mean, um, I guess it just depends on
I just to
depends on
see
the
the
case.
suffer, like you said, the suffering on the grand scale,
Mhm.
and then well, I'm going to help Billy, and that ought to do it. It's just it, I that's just not a good explanation. I just don't. I'm always looking for something a lot bigger. I guess I
So,
just
but I mean, it kind of sounds like you're saying. It sounds like your position is, I know God can't be the explanation for why, for instance, Barbara was healed, or this elderly person, because any God that would perform miracles would certainly perform them on children. And since that's not happening, then I have reason ahead of time before the evidence for this miracle on the adult is presented to me to reject
well,
a miraculous God. Or
I wouldn't rule it out as a reason to not be a god, but I would rule out the arguments of loving and those type of things because I, yeah, I don't see how you could lovingly create something to see it suffer horribly and think that healing a couple people, well, look how great I am. Look, I'm still here. Sorry for the rest of you. You know what I mean? It's now when you go to more a, deistic or pantheistic or even a pantheon of gods that maybe are having a council and they're sitting around saying, you know what? Billy didn't pray hard enough. You know what I mean? So yeah, he doesn't get cured, but the other one does. But when you go to the one God who's supposed to love and care and all those definitions, then I think it becomes more of a problem.
do you think the potential for an afterlife would uh, potentially help like the issues that stem from children suffering? Like, yeah, I mean,
No,
it would still be true that they suffer, but it wouldn't be, it, in a way, could be resolved. Not completely resolved, but yeah, they would be in eternity with God after that.
No, I think who was it? Maybe Danny or something. I put that argument to that that wouldn't make any sense at all because if God can create an existence like heaven without suffering,
Hmm.
then it makes no sense to create one with suffering. Only to say, well, you're only going to suffer for a little bit, but then you get to go to the great place I made. I don't see why, the two creations. If you're going to create, supposedly heaven was created first, right? That's where God and the angels and whatever, I mean, there had to be a place where they existed. And then they decided to make the universe or our planet, depending on the religion, only to put a bunch of people on it to suffer. But it's okay because we still have, the great place to go to.
Yeah, I think
That I think that just adds more problems to it. I think the afterlife adds problems to it. I would agree more with I'm always more with if an afterlife exists, then it can't be anything like living in the clouds and communing with Jesus and the angels or anything like that. It would be more of a, you know, continuation with the universe, all our molecules and atoms all scrambled across, everywhere and something like that. But the whole idea of being in a form and having these particular afterlives, when you pick them apart, they always seem to fall apart because, again, if you made this great creation, why make the other one? You know,
yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of possible explanations. You know, for
but yeah,
why.
I understand the point though that even though you had a terrible life here, you'd be rewarded in the afterlife. But people who had a great life here are going to get rewarded in the afterlife too. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Right? So that again would be, well, somebody's still getting the shaft on that. You know what I mean? If we're both going to
Yeah, that's
heaven,
fair.
you know what I mean? But I'm sick every day of my life and you're not, and we both go to heaven. I don't think it made any difference.
Yeah, what point did it serve?
Right.
Yeah, like the suffering I've encountered in my life has been extremely mild compared to what a lot of other people have suffered.
Me too.
Um, and I feel very fortunate to be able to say that. But even some of the mild suffering I've undergone, I've been like, did this make me a better person? Did this do anything but make me kind of bitter towards other people or resentful?
I just cussed a lot and said, "Take me to the hospital." So I don't, you know, um, and like I say, I had to have emergency surgery a few years ago, and I was scared. I mean, I was giving my wife a kiss and saying, "Hey, if anything happens, I love you," and tell the kids I love them, all that kind of stuff. And but I didn't have any experience, and I didn't, you know, even though I was in that emotional type of state, and everything, and I didn't hear from an angel saying it was going to be okay, or Jesus, or God, or I didn't feel anything differently. And I went to surgery. I trusted the surgeon, and everything worked out okay.
Well, I'm happy it worked out okay.
But in,
Yeah,
in another case, somebody would have had a profound experience. They were wheeling me down to the hallway, and oh, this could be it, and here came Jesus and everything. And it's like, well,
yeah,
he didn't show up to talk to me.
yeah. I don't know what to make of a lot of near death experiences, and today we've talked about miracles, and
I
I
think,
didn't
well, again,
recognize.
I think it's what you were talking about that, it does have a lot to do with what your state of mind is. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think a person could trigger what to them seems to be like an NDE, um, or a true, appearance of Jesus, or I want to say Malcolm X said he had a vision of the Prophet Muhammad in his jail cell. So, they can't all be right. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, I think people can generate profound experiences without there being a divine cause involved. I haven't studied NDEs a ton, so I don't put a lot of stock in them. I haven't studied miracles a ton, more broadly, but there was another point I wanted to make. Oh yeah, so in terms of like the going back to the children and why I think the afterlife is relevant. I still think it would be. Um, I still think children suffering would be a problem. Like I wouldn't hand wave it away. I wouldn't say, "Oh, there's nothing to see here." But I do think it would be less of a problem if an afterlife existed. And I know you said that it's more of a problem if an afterlife exists. And is that just because of the unfairness of, two people? One has a life that's
But
not with suffering.
I
One,
think well, I think the argument for even having the life is like a test, right? And to have, your experience through life and to make all the supposed free will decisions and choosing the right path, and doing all those things.
sure.
But if you never made it past, 1 year old, again, then what was the point? You see what I mean? There's that, they never did the trials and tribulations or any of the arguments of why you're supposed to be here in the first place.
Yeah, and I think it's an even, a bigger problem was is like miscarriages.
Right.
And you know, yeah, obviously a 1-year-old doesn't have a ton of life
Well,
experiences that
yeah,
most.
and you could have an experience from having a miscarriage that you knew about. But women, can have miscarriages, without knowing about it. You know what I mean? You're
Yeah.
passing something microscopic, and these things can go on. And like you say, what was, yeah, why? Why did, that was a kind of a waste of God's time there.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't know. That I think that's a big problem for theism is well, one big problem I think for Christian theism is, uh, if Christians ought to be pro-life, then it seems strange that God in the Bible seems quite not pro-life in many cases. Like to flood the entire world, including, I would imagine there were at least some pregnant women.
Some babies, right?
Yeah. Um, I mean, was the world really that sinful?
Right. What did the babies do? Yeah.
Yeah, what did the babies do wrong? And I mean, wouldn't it have been better for God to have found means of having them raised up in the right culture, with the right set of beliefs? Similarly, with the Canaanites, the idea is that they were uh, so wicked and evil that like God had to just wipe all of them out. Um, but I mean, really, like that included like toddlers, and
Hmm.
assuming you know you're not sympathetic to the Paul Copan, oh, it was just hyperbolic language type explanation for those passages, which I haven't read his book. My Christian friend says I need to read it before I go back to him with um, any kind of objections, I
Well,
guess.
there's
About.
there's always somebody telling you there's another way to read the Bible stories.
Yeah, I mean, and that's frustrating, and that's
But
one
yeah,
of
like I
one of
say,
the reasons.
even when they ask guys that have read and studied it a lot, like William Craig and those guys, they're stumped. So I don't think that they can just, yeah, just change what it says so easily because it generally, it stumps a lot of them.
And I do think what's the
But
word?
I wanted to say before I forgot though, that's another point though, is that, like you say, the is it okay for the terrible thing to happen to the baby if they're going to end up in heaven, right? Well, then again, I have to ask then, what does a baby do in heaven? You know what I mean? I mean, are you a baby forever and you have absolutely no life experience? You never learned how to walk or talk or have any memories, you know what I mean? Then what what does that do in heaven? I mean, I can understand the perspective of, you lived your life, and when you go to heaven, you're going to see your grandparents, and someday your kids are going to pass on, and you're going to get to see them again, and the whole life experience. But whenever they try to use, well, it's okay because the babies are in heaven. I think that again is just, another big problem that just doesn't make, a justification other than, oh, well, Jesus is, cradling on the babies and everything. But I don't,
So,
again, you don't have, none of the things of the life experience that, are supposed to be part somewhat of the heaven experience.
so you would find it less problematic that babies died if we had reason to think that when they got to heaven they would grow older and uh, develop
Right.
memories and
Yeah, because yeah, if they were promised, yeah, they get to have their life. You know what I mean? Because that's just seems to me that it tosses out all the reasons why we're supposed to be alive in the first place, and we go right back to why aren't we just in heaven to begin with?
yeah, that's a good question. I guess I would say I don't see. I'm not too familiar with the Bible, but correct me if I'm wrong. I haven't heard anything that suggests that babies remain babies, or like if you die and you're 17, that you're gonna stay 17 years old and like you're never gonna
Mhm.
mature and develop and grow in the afterlife at all. And I'm not just talking physically. I mean both physically and maturity wise.
And that's great, but then why aren't we just in heaven then? I mean, if you can be born and learn to
And
walk
mature
and
in heaven.
talk and go on dates and, have all that life experience in heaven, like I say, that's just again, it just seems as like it's a bad argument to not just have the heaven in the first place.
Yeah, I think that would discount all of the all the reasons people give for why we're not all immediately in heaven to begin with. Like um, the goods that come from free will and choosing a relationship with God when it's not
Mhm.
almost coercion because it's so abundantly obvious and in your face. Um, and you would say, well, or you could say, I would imagine someone would come back with, well, the baby didn't have the chance to choose God, and God put them in heaven, and
Mhm.
God, in effect, removed their free will. Or you could say God removed free will of a lot of people in the Bible when he performed miracles and made his existence all the more obvious. But I think God having good reason to do something at a specific time or like for specific people doesn't necessarily mean he would be obligated to do that thing all the time. And that's not to say I know why babies die and why God would put them in heaven despite it removing their free will. But I think you could still say free will is a greater good, or free will is a great good, and like it seems plausible that God would want that to be um, a regular feature of the world, um, without there being exceptions where maybe there is some unknown good that comes from it's hard to say even that there's some unknown good from the death of a child, but I think if you were a Christian you would have to believe that there is, right? I mean, because God
Sure,
wouldn't just allow it to happen for no reason.
sure.
um,
I just think that I think all the perspective and the afterlife arguments and everything are all written from an adult perspective. I don't think they ever, included the infants or the children in the argument to begin with, because I think everything is set up like we were saying. You need to live, you need to believe in God. Well, first you got to find God,
Mm-hmm.
And according to the Christians, you not only have to find, but then you have to be, born again or saved or baptized, or, you have to go through all these different things. And those are all part of being alive. So I think, yeah, it just doesn't make any sense that it was written or the rules are divine or anything else, because it reads to me like some adults were writing about themselves and they just never stopped to consider the arguments of, well, what about the kids? Like I say, they don't get a life, and what are they going to be judged on? Well, another thing is Judgment Day, right? Almost every religion has a Judgment Day. Well, what are they going to be judged on?
What about the babies? Yeah.
Well, then that's why you had to have a life, was to have the judgment. So yeah, I think you got big problems. And I'm, like I say, I'm not saying that we discovered or anything. I've heard a lot of the theologians being stumped with the child problems. One of the other, what is your religious history then? I mean, were your parents religious? Do you have a religious background, or?
Yeah, my parents were religious, but it wasn't like it wasn't something that was like central to our identity, like we would occasionally pray before Thanksgiving, Christmas dinner, sometimes before other meals, and but we didn't go to church, and not because we were necessarily against church. It just,
Mm-hmm.
I think, not to get too personal, but I think my parents just grew up in kind of like Baptist, probably more fundamentalist churches, like maybe some of the Fire and Brimstone. At least I want to say that's kind of what happened. And so I think that kind of left a bad taste in their mouths. And they just didn't see the need to go to church in order to have a relationship with God or to have a meaningful prayer life, or to be a Christian. And I still think that's probably true, even if Christianity were true. But I would think going to church would be a good thing. But I always enjoyed going to church when I would go with friends, and I was always curious about, I guess, spiritual type questions. And when I was 10, I had like a born again experience. That was the one I mentioned earlier. And then, I wouldn't say I became more religious. I just started identifying as a Christian, but like behavior wise, didn't change really. Not only morally, but like even in terms of actively reading the Bible or praying or anything like that. And then in college, I guess I had a kind of a moment where I call it an existential crisis or whatever you want to call it. But I was like 18 and I was like, I feel like if I achieve everything I want in life, like, I get a hot wife and I get the good job and I get the house and the car and all that stuff, I still don't feel like that's going to be enough. And I was hearing from people that had achieved all those things, not like that I knew personally, but like there's a famous video now of Tom Brady who, it was like when he said, he was asked the question, you've kind of got everything, like, don't you feel like you've kind of made it, or something like that. I butchered that, but he was like, I think a lot of other people in my shoes would probably say, yeah, I've made it, but I think like there's got to be more to it than this. And many years later, now it was almost 10 years ago, I hear that and I think, okay, well, it could just be the case that God doesn't exist and it sucks, and people want something that material possessions and status and romantic relationships can't offer, and that would suck. But at that time, that led me to wanting God to exist. And so I kind of dove into the apologetics thing. I watched a lot of debates with William Lane Craig. I still think William Lane Craig is a fantastic debater and brilliant, and a prolific writer and speaker. But I think initially my reasons for going back into religion were a little more stemmed a little more from like a desire for there to be something more than just the material, I guess, like to have a true objective purpose and meaning in life. And so that's not necessarily reason to think Christianity isn't true, just because it wouldn't provide those things if it were the case. But I think you have to be very mindful going into an investigation of a religious claim, like, why do I want to know this is true, or if this is true to begin with? And does my desire for it to be true, is that going to cloud my judgment? And I definitely think it did for me, certainly in terms of what I was willing to expose myself to. I wouldn't go out of my way to read an atheist book or anything, but I wasn't reading a lot of Christian books either. But I would definitely watch tons of William Lane Craig, and I had no problem watching Christian speakers by themselves, but I wouldn't watch atheist speakers unless it was in like a debate context. So I didn't treat the issue fairly. I think nowadays I treat it more fairly, and I try and poke holes in both sides if I can. But yeah, so I went from Christian to, I guess, briefly agnostic in high school, Christian again in college. Then shortly after college, I guess I kind of fell out of it, probably like in 2018 or so. And then I guess I used to identify as agnostic around that time. And then, yeah, now I'm kind of a hard to categorize theist. So it may have been a longer answer than you wanted, but that's my timeline, baby.
No, that's fine. Yeah, I went to church when I was a kid. I was baptized. I went through confirmation. I supposedly said the words and everything, but I never felt anything. And it's nothing it can't be anything profound because I don't remember.
Sure.
I know we had to go up in front of the church and say whatever the words were that we accept Jesus or whatever it was. But yeah, it couldn't have been anything profound because I have no recollection of it at all. I remember doing confirmation, mostly because when we went out of town, I left my retainer and a glass of water at the restaurant, and my parents had to pay for another retainer. So that's how I remember going through confirmation classes, because part of it was going to the headquarters for the church, which was out of town. And we also visited other churches and a synagogue and stuff like that. And that's my only memory of it. So, but I did go to church. My parents weren't real religious or anything, but it was what you did. You know what I mean? You had a church and you went to church on Sundays, and my mother made me promise to go through confirmation, and to her credit, I became a member of the church. And when I got married to my wife, we got married there, and it's a beautiful church and everything. So it worked out. I had a church to get married in. So, but no, I never had any experiences. I don't have any ill will towards any of the people at church. There wasn't no fire and brimstone. It wasn't with any of my relatives or anything. My grandmother used to say, "Don't cuss or you'll get hit by a lightning bolt," stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I never had anything like that. But I just went along, and maybe it's just because, I didn't have those experiences that other people claim they had. And I just moved on, I guess. Then as I got a little older, I got a lot more interest in reading more about other religions and getting more of the perspective that, yeah, people believe in a lot of religions and I don't see any difference between them and no reason to join one over another.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not going to say that it's not understandable why people want to go to church or belong to a religion or want to believe. There's a lot of reasons outside of just the religion. You've got the social interaction and, the peer groups and support groups and all that. And it's all good. I just never saw the reason to have to go to church for it all when you can do it in other places. But as far as the argument with the atheists or the YouTube videos and everything, I came to this realization. Confirmation was in 8th grade, so by high school there was just no religion anymore, and I just never went back other than
Mm-hmm.
to learn more about it.
Right.
So, and I think Matt Dillahunty famously says that if God wants me to know that he exists, then he would know the way to tell me. And,
Mm-hmm.
I don't see it. And I guess, there was a point where I wanted to maybe discover something spiritual,
Sure.
reading about like a lot of the things you named, NDEs, OBEs, different religions, meditations. And, I studied a lot, read a lot and everything on it. But again, it just seems that they're just all reaching the same conclusions. Is that I told Rebecca the one day that prayer is good. Meditation's good. Religions are good. A lot of things are good for you. But over the overall, though, I just don't see why anybody has to pick one over the other. I think that if you can be happy and peaceful in your garden, that I don't see the difference with believing in a God other than the fear of what afterlife you're going to go to. Because I think you can get all the same benefits. You can have joy. You can have a reason to get up in the morning. You can have profound experiences with nature and everything. And in many different ways, different people have many different ways of being happy. And if religion is one of them, that's fine. But I'm trying to figure out, well, why does it have to be a divine thing? Why does it have to be divine rules? Why do miracles have to be divine? Why does everything have to be divine? And I just don't, I'm more leaning towards the, if there is a God, I don't see it doing anything. I don't see it has done anything, and it's nothing more than an observer, and that miracles do happen, but they're not divine. It's just the luck of the dice. And I see it kind of an insult, really, that, one little child gets saved and another one doesn't. I would tell, when I asked you earlier how you would feel, I would feel insulted. You know what I mean? I would generally feel insulted. And I don't think if I was a believer, I could
square that.
I could square it with, why me? You know what I mean? It's just, it doesn't seem to be anything for a greater good. It doesn't seem to be anything to bring everybody into Christianity. It doesn't seem to be a sign. It just seems to be what a believer wants to believe, and that's all fine and well. But I don't really see miracles as being anything in a divine nature, even if we can't explain it. Because to me, like you were saying, I can't see God, if it exists, it being anything more than an observer. Because as soon as you try to explain why God did these things, I think you just open up such a can of worms that it for me, it's always going to be a problem, because as soon as you say that God had to do it or it was divine, that it just raises more questions, it raises more skepticism. And if there, again, the reasons to bring in believers, I don't think it's doing that. I think it's doing the opposite.
So I think it's kind of inescapable to it's kind of inescapable to uh, have your views on God's psychology, or the mind of God, or the mind of God if he existed, um, influence how you view the world. Because from your view, it's like, if God existed, I can't understand why he would allow some to suffer, some children to suffer, but then save others. That seems arbitrary, and that seems like a slap in the face to the.
Well, not just not a God. We're talking about gods that are already described as being loving.
Yeah. So
Now, I could agree that a God could exist, but not have the absolute attribute of
right.
being loving. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So,
Maybe the pantheon of gods, where some of them have an attitude. You know what I mean?
but I think a lot of people would disagree, rightly or wrongly. I'm just saying that there are views in which it's completely coherent to talk about both there being a loving God and that same God allowing what appears to us to be gratuitous and pointless suffering, but perhaps it's not. And I'm not saying we shouldn't take the problem of evil seriously, and I'm not saying we should respond to every instance with, well, maybe God has a good reason. Um, I'm just pointing out that one, that people have different views on what constitutes a loving God, and also that I think it's impossible for us um, to evaluate the evidence for or against theism without making some kind of assumptions about what we would think God would or wouldn't do, um, based on him being all loving or all knowing or what have you. Um, so I guess I bring that up just to say everyone's doing it. It's not just theists that um, are saying if God existed, he would create the world or anything like that. I think everyone's kind of doing that.
I think that's part of the problem, like you hit on earlier, that but then the theists can't all agree. So then you're confused. So you want to go to William Lane Craig, who obviously is learned and can answer your question, and then he's going to tell you, I don't know. That's one of those things that God works in mysterious ways, type things, and he just doesn't have an answer for it. And I'm like, well, gee whiz, if you don't have an answer for it, then I'm stumped.
Yeah, I mean, on that point, I think there's
You would think there would be better answers. You know what I mean?
well, there are. I mean, you might not think they're better, but there are answers other than uh,
But
just
yeah, I
simply
don't think
not
there's good
sure.
answers, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but to go back to the Bible point, about there being different views on it. I don't know. I think it is important when reading any text to ask, how was this intended to be read uh,
Hmm.
by the author, or how did the author intend the reader to read this? Who was this being prepared for? And so, when people talk about how should we interpret Genesis, I don't think that's a meaningless question just because people interpret it differently. Um, that being said, it does seem obvious that Christians can get caught in the weeds pretty often about the differences in their denominations and their interpretations of the Bible.
Well,
And so,
the Bible doesn't help either, because if you go to the Bible, why do bad things happen? Somebody's distraught, and they lost a loved one or whatever, and a believing loved one, and they prayed and everything, and so they go to the Bible. What does the Bible say? Why do these bad things happen? Well, it depends where you read the Bible. You're going to read in the Bible that, well, things just happen because they do. You're going to read in the Bible that
Mhm.
things happen because people are being punished for them. You're going to read in the Bible that people are being punished because somebody else did something, so you're being punished for it.
Mhm.
And you've got all these different explanations coming from different directions that are basically 180 degrees. So you got, again, a problem with the Bible, that why do bad things happen? Depends where you read in the Bible as to why bad things happen. It can be God's wrath, or it can be not God's wrath. So I think you're left with questions of why did these bad things happen when you go to read the Bible, because I don't think it's clear as to why bad things happen.
Yeah,
In
that's
fact,
very. And that,
it gives you, different answers,
mhm.
instead of, I would expect it to give a consistent answer. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah, on such a big question like that, I agree.
I think the Bible's too long and left out too many things. You know what I mean? You have to read this really long book only to not get, the answers you were looking for. You know what I'm
Right.
saying?
Yeah, I mean, I take issue, like I said, with a lot of parts of the Bible. So I still think it's worth looking into. And I at least want to study the resurrection more just to be equipped to. Um, I mean, even if it's only to respond to it as a non-believer. Um, but certainly, if it did happen, I would like to believe that. But yeah, I mean, um, I think it goes beyond just there not being a clear answer to why bad things happen to good people. There's not a lot of clear answers on a lot of stuff.
Well, you could, yeah, the resurrection is, supposedly, one of the greatest miracles ever, but you can offer, a ton of alternate natural explanations for the same event. I said often that if Jesus was flogged as bad as he was, he could have had trauma to his system. He could have been out cold for 3 days, so far deep into a coma he appeared dead, and 3 days later woke up and then split town because you didn't want to go through that again. And you can go on and on and on and on
Yeah.
with perfectly natural explanations that don't have to be miraculous
Well, I think the problem Christians have with
or
that particular
divinely
explanation.
miraculous.
Um, so yeah, I think with that particular explanation, I know that one has been, I want to say, basically unanimously rejected. Um, and that's because, well, at least in part, this is what Christians argue, is that if it were the case that Jesus didn't actually die and he just revived himself in the coolness of the tomb, it would have been very strange for him to have convinced people that he like defeated death and he was raised from the dead, not just he didn't die in the first place. I mean, if that were the case, he would have been clearly needing medical attention, and it would have been maybe not divine, but colloquially, we would say that's miraculous that he managed to get out of the tomb and walk around and stuff like that. I'm sure his friends would have said that too, but
Yeah,
uh,
I don't believe that. I think if he would have woke up, he would have took off and not hung around, because they would have put him right back on the cross.
but then that assumes that
I'm just saying you can give a lot of natural explanations
Right.
for, you know, versus that somebody actually raised from the dead, because I can even give you stories today where people wake up in the morgue, you know. So
Yeah, sure.
it does happen. Was that divine? Well, usually they explain, well, no, they were just so deep, their respiration was so slow or whatever that it didn't get picked up and they were declared dead. And it's a fair mistake to make. But I don't think that them waking up in the morgue was divine either. I think they just woke up.
Yeah, I think Christians are what they're getting at is that, like, they're not saying you can't put forward natural alternatives. They're saying that none of them have the same explanatory power that the resurrection does, because, you know,
Because it has to be divine.
well, yeah, I mean, and to kind of um, play off of, something Gary Habermas might say, you have to, if you're taking the minimal facts approach, you not only have to explain the empty tomb, which Jesus being revived, him not having actually died, and walking out of the tomb would explain the empty tomb, but it wouldn't explain like the postmortem appearances. Um, it wouldn't explain, you know, really the origins of Christianity, because the origins of Christianity are based on the belief that Jesus was raised, like that he had died. I think that was a requirement, he can't die for your sins if he didn't die. Um, and yeah, so
Well,
I
that
think it
I
goes,
find the tomb problematic right away, because you're going to have the argument that crucified people weren't allowed to be buried. So part of the crucifixion was that you were left up there to be humiliated, even in death. So you're always going to have the argument that crucified people were not allowed to be buried, and even if they were, it wasn't immediately the same day. You would have to beg and plead and get somebody's permission. And so just the empty tomb argument I always find problematic, because you can't prove a tomb to begin with.
but don't the Gospels say that Joseph of Arimathea did uh, kind of plead with Pontius Pilate to allow for Jesus to be
Right,
buried?
but the only examples of people that were taken down were extremely rare, and it was never for anything that would be a high crime. I mean,
Um,
Jesus supposedly said "King of the Jews" on the cross. I mean, that's a high crime. He was going up against Caesar. And I just don't see how somebody who was putting themselves up against the rule of the day would got special treatment.
would have been
I think
allowed to
I
be
think
buried.
they would have been the last one to get special treatment, because if the idea of crucifying him because he claimed to be king of the Jews and to put that on his cross, I think you would clearly want to leave him up there as a message to other people. You do not declare yourself king around, Rome, or even the Jews,
Mhm.
because they were yelling blasphemy too. So
Right.
either way, I don't think that's there's so many problems with that.
Yeah, I haven't really considered that, as a potential problem for Jesus being buried, so I'll have to.
And well, you've got early gospels of Mark that just end when Jesus says
Right.
it is finished. And
Mhm.
then they kind of said, you know what? Then they added on the stories of
The appearances.
yeah, because people, what's the word, post bereavement, which again happens. People see dead people even today. There's a certain, I forget what the number is, but there's a certain amount of the population that sees grandma in her
Like,
rocking chair.
is it grief-induced hallucination? Is that what
Some,
you're?
yeah, whatever the proper term is. Yeah. But people, yeah, they come home and they see grandma in the rocking chair. You know what I mean? Did grandma
Mhm.
actually leave her grave? No. Do they
Yeah.
actually see grandma in the rocking chair? Yes. as real as their brain can make it, they see grandma in the rocking chair. And again, I wouldn't deny they didn't see grandma in the rocking chair, but at the same time, I would say, as a skeptic, at the same time we see grandma in the rocking chair, I can check grandma's grave and she's still in it.
Sure. And if I were defending the resurrection, I guess I would say um, the nature of the appearances must have been such that it not only convinced them that Jesus appeared to them as a ghost or something like that, but that he had actually been raised from the dead. I think when people see their grandma after um, they've passed, that they never reach the conclusion that grandma's actually been raised from the dead. She's not dead. She's alive with us. Um, Another point with that is it's to talk about like the criteria for miracle claims. Christians, I guess, would argue that the claim of the resurrection should have been very easily refuted because it was made early enough and in such close proximity to where Jesus had been crucified and buried, assuming he was buried. Um, you know, a common argument is that they could have just paraded Jesus' dead body out in the streets, and that would have ended it immediately. Um, make of that what you will. I'm just throwing that out there
Well,
as
not necessarily, because there are other, stories of people that were raised from the dead. So,
yeah, but
and that's another thing, that Jesus being raised from the dead is not unique, because even in the Bible, other people were raised from the dead. So,
well,
the
right.
idea, it's like it was a special event. It seemed to be like it happened a lot back in the day. You know what I mean? People were being raised from the dead a lot. It wasn't like they seem to make it like today, if somebody was raised from the dead, you would go, wow, right? But in the times, there were stories of people being raised from the dead all over the place. So it wasn't quite the unique one-off experience that they make it out to be.
Yeah, I know there were other resurrections reported in the Bible. I don't think it was the mere fact that he was raised from the dead, but I think it was in the broader context of like the Messiah, like the purported. I've used that word a lot tonight, purported, but yeah, the purported Messiah being raised from the dead, and second temple Jews having no expectation of that. Like the idea that the Messiah would be crucified by the enemy was
Not
kind
part
of
of the
unheard
plan.
of. I mean,
And
they probably would
well,
have found it disgusting.
it wasn't part of the plan either. He was supposed to be king, and the Messiah is supposed to not die.
Right.
So I think they were kind of surprised when he died. But again, though, miraculous, like I say, it's even if Jesus came back from the dead. Let's say he was dead and he came back from the dead, and it was miraculous. Then there's still the burden that it was divine, and just him claiming that it was divine, well, that would be his belief. Of course he would believe that. But was there, but it doesn't prove that it was divine. You know what I mean? It just proves that he believes it was divine. And then you can go to other stories of other people and other religions,
I
and
would think.
you've got the same
Go ahead.
argument. You
Sorry.
know what I mean?
Um, you kind of seem to be freezing and going in and out. I do
Yeah,
have to
you
get off
did
here in a
too.
second, but
We got a glitch.
I would
It must be a sign. It's divine. It's a divine
must be a
sign.
sign. I would say that you know if it were the case the other resurrection claims that you talk about were like of a similar nature, then I wouldn't find the resurrection argument as interesting. But it seems like, oh yeah, to your point about why trust that it's from God. If someone claimed to be God and they were performing miracles and they predicted that they were going to die and be raised from the dead, and then that happened, and then they have this new resurrection body, you could always say, well, maybe it's some other explanation besides God that is still miraculous in its own right, but it's not divine. Sure, you could say that, but I just think you're it kind of goes beyond Occam's razor. Like, why try and find some ad hoc explanation that has extra assumptions when I guess the most obvious one, or the one given to us, seems to explain all the data, and yeah, I guess makes sense in the larger context of Jesus' life as a whole, and the kind of remarkable life I guess he led. All that's assuming it's true, but I guess I just see a difference there. But I'll let you get the last word, and then I'll jump off.
Yeah, well, yeah, you wanted to, maybe we could talk about the resurrection another day.
Sure.
Yeah, and I just wanted to end with saying that, like I say, there are definitely things we can't explain, and I can call them miraculous, but I don't call them divine. I still think that calling something divine requires the belief already, and then you just see it as being divine. I don't see any evidence for being miracles divine. I see plenty of evidence that they were just luck of the draw, or they naturally healed, or in a lot of the stories, they seem to leave out that they were getting experimental treatments, things like that. And that's actually what cured them. And that even if there are, a minority of things we can't explain, there's always going to be a minority of things we can't explain in everything. And I don't think that's good evidence, although it doesn't disprove it. It could be God, it could be divine. I think that overwhelmingly the evidence is the opposite way than what you're seeing it as. But I appreciate your view on it. And I understand that, you can see it another way. But the way I'm seeing it is that there's just not enough evidence to show that it's divine or that there's any purpose for doing it that would be, like I say, like to make everybody Christian, because after 1,500 so years or whatever, everybody's not Christian. So that didn't work. You know what I mean? And if Allah's making the signs, then it's not working for Allah, because not everybody's a Muslim. And if the Hindu God is given the signs, it didn't work either, because not everybody's Hindu. You see what I'm saying? So as far as that goes, I'm always looking at a larger picture. And what I'm always bringing it back down to, it just always seems to be, it's important for this individual believer. But that's it.
Yeah, we'll have to leave it there. But yeah, next time I'd love to talk about the resurrection specifically, and also talk about the frequency of miracles a little bit more, because I mentioned that there's a few that really stand out to me, but I know Craig Keener is.
Well, you want to talk about it? Yeah, why I'll tell you what, we can talk about it again. Why don't you look up, like you say, you want to get some specifics, and then send them to me beforehand, and so we can each look them over a little bit, and then we can kind of pick apart some specific claims.
Hash it out.
Yeah, instead, we'll attack a couple of them, hash them out. Sounds great. And it's always nice to talk to you. Nice conversation. I like having a conversation where we can have a nice conversation, and it seemed to have been a nice conversation, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me on, and
Well, thanks for motivating me. I wanted to get a channel going and get this all going, and I appreciate the motivation. So hopefully we can get some more going and maybe get some other people in some discussions too. That'd be great.
yeah, love it. All
Okay.
right, I'll catch
Have a
up
good
with you
night,
soon.
Brian. Okay.
You too,
Bye-bye.
Dave. Thanks. See ya.